Morning, everyone. It's great to have such a wonderful panel to discuss such an important topic. I think I'll dive into it with just a little bit of context. I don't want to spend a lot of time introducing the distinguished panel that we have. Reading through the bios will probably take the whole hour that we have. I know all of the detailed bios are in the materials that you have. So with the brief sort of descriptions of each of the panelists that are up there, I think we'll dive into the discussion because I know it's going to be a really rich discussion. A lot has already been said about the importance of foundational literacy and numeracy, but just to build on that a little bit to set the context for the discussion we are going to have. We all know that foundational literacy and numeracy really forms the bedrock for a child's learning journey, not just in those early years, affecting the ability of the child to sort of perform academically in early years, but also really setting the stage for how well the child learns as he or she progresses through their learning journey across the rest of school. And in fact, there's a lot of research and practical experience that shows that even the ability to sort of benefit from additional years of schooling really depends on how well those foundational concepts have been set up, right? Whether the child knows how to read and write simple sentences, the ability to do sort of basic numeric skills. All of those things profoundly affect the child's learning journey. Right? And so this is an incredibly important concept. We also saw briefly from the video, and I think most people are aware of the statistics, that the actual outcomes when it comes to FLN are quite dire. Right? And it's also therefore a serious challenge to be worked on. We talk a lot about the demographic dividend that we have as a country with the huge number of young children that are graduating school. But that can very quickly turn into a big problem if children are not equipped in the right way to actually learn and benefit from the years of schooling that they're getting. Right? And so there is a need to sort of urgently solve this problem at scale. And that's going to require a multitude of approaches. Right? It's going to require making sure that the teacher in the classroom is well prepared to deliver effective lessons. The teacher is, the professional development of the teacher is taken care of. When it comes to large government school systems, it means making sure that all of the administration that happens outside of the classroom is happening effectively in service of the actual learning of the child. It means that when there are digital programs or technology that we put in place, all of that is effectively serving the teacher to be able to benefit the student at the end of the day. So there's a multitude of things that need to be done. And to do this at scale in an urgent manner is no easy challenge. Right? So it's great to have a group like this to be able to reflect on each of the facets of that challenge. And I think there's sort of no better group than this, I think, that we could have put together. So with that by way of introduction, I think we'll jump in and start to talk about some of these facets that I've mentioned. And Beatrice, if I may, I'll start with you. You bring an international experience, and so I'd love to hear from you, especially on the idea of the teacher preparedness and teacher professional development. What aspects of that you see as being most important to be able to deliver effective learning in a classroom, but also learning that is joyful? I think that's been a theme of the session yesterday as well. So just to pick up on that as well, what elements could bring both effective learning as well as joyfulness? And how can some of those be imbibed into a large system like India's?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So we're talking about, we've been talking a lot about what is the mindset that we have and our approach to learning. And I think the most important element here that we need to look at is where is that change of mindset? How can we support teachers to navigate through that change? We need to start seeing the students as active agents more than receptors of the learning. And therefore, I think it's very important that the school leaders and educational leaders support strategically and sustainably, it has been said earlier as well in the video, that shift, how build a shared vocabulary that is constant and that is understood by everyone. When I talk about building shared vocabulary, I'm talking, for example, about changing the concept of system to approach. What is the learning approach? And that way, by using those words, we are putting the student at the center, at the core of our conversations, and they become the agents rather than us, the ones instructing them and giving them, providing them the learning. What does leadership really, or educational leaders need to focus on is to have that clear vision. What are 2-3 components that need to change, that we need to approach in order to build the change of mindset? And again, as I say, it's got to be consistent, it's got to be strategically planned, and it has to provide a constant feedback and constant feed forward to our teachers, because they follow, they trust us, and they follow what we are giving them, what we are providing to them. For teachers, I think it's important that they also see the learner as the one leading the learning rather than the teacher steering the learning. And so we need to provide them with a couple of tools that they can design meaningful learning spaces, that they learn how to extend the thinking of the students rather than building unit planners or learning activities that have an end. There is no end. It's got to be open, because each child is going to take that learning to a different dimension and in a different way. And practice a lot asking open-end questions to students rather than giving them a concept that doesn't stimulate and extend that thinking. And most importantly, flexibility in the curriculum. That is something that is going to give to the teachers the ability to play around their teaching and learning practices and their learning approach. And for me, one of the things that I believe on, it's the trust that we put in our teachers. It's important that leaders put full trust on the teachers, because as much as we can say, as much as I can say as a leader, they are the ones on the ground every day. They're the ones that know their children. They are the ones that talk to the parents, and they're the ones delivering what we aspire, what we envision. So put trust on those teachers and give them those tools to navigate that shift.
Thanks so much, Beatrice. And maybe if I could do a quick follow-up on that, and of course, in your role also as the ECIS Early Childhood Chair, I'm sure you'll have experienced sort of the need to develop some of those skills that you talked about, say, open-ended questions, for example, right? Developing those sorts of skills in teachers and doing that at scale. So sort of any reflections on building those sorts of skills in a large group of teachers?
Yeah, I think, again, when you have a vision, you build a strategic plan in order to deliver it and implement it. So you have to make sure that when you're training teachers at a large scale, that there is a shared understanding and a shared vision, that it's honest, that is clear, and that you give space for reflection to every single teacher as well. So when we do, for example, workshops or webinars, there is a lot of the audience impact more than the workshop leader impact. And even if we look at how we're set up right now, we are delivering. So how could we maybe change this kind of setting so that it's the audience that has that growth, and I'm putting the agency on them? It's the same thing we would do in a classroom. We would do it with the teachers.
Excellent. Thanks so much for those reflections, Beatrice. Ankit, if I could turn it to you next. You, of course, at Samagra, you've been working very closely with the government of Uttar Pradesh, maybe other state governments as well, and you've been working on the Nipun Lakshya app. To sort of gather data at scale, but also to support FLN overall. Right? And so curious from that experience, what have been some of the most important either design choices in the creation of that app, or in its rollout and implementation that you see as having been the most effective in that partnership with the state government?
Sure. Let me just add a bit of context there. So the Nipun Lakshya app is basically a tool that we are using in the state of UP, which is available to all the 450,000 teachers that are there in government schools. They use this application to test if a student is Nipun or not. And the Nipun has been very clearly defined as a target on what the student needs to achieve. It is not a data collection tool per se, and that is also a design choice, right? When we use technology in large-scale governance, our experience has been that it is generally seen by teachers as a tool which is a digital spy. People are trying to check on what the teachers are doing in the classroom. We did not want to do that. We wanted a tool that enables teachers to teach more effectively in the classroom, and that is where the 3 design choices came into mind when we are launching this application for all teachers. The first one is that it has to be a very, very user-centric, intuitive tool that the teachers can use, right? It has to be very, very easy to use. It cannot add any time to what the teachers are already spending in the classroom, right? So it is a very simple tool, allows for a teacher to assess a student within 3 to 5 minutes. Within 5 minutes, a teacher knows if a student is Nipun or not. There is a digital record that is created. For the teacher, they're not creating new questions. They're not wasting any time assessing a student when basically they're asking them questions and then evaluating all of them, right? So for a teacher, it is almost an enabler for them in terms of assessing students. So that's one thing that we did. The second thing was that it has to be a standardized tool. Teachers need to trust that whatever assessment they are doing, and if they are getting to know if a student is Nipun or not, that is the same assessment that a third-party assessor would also get, right? So in the state of UP, the teacher has the same tool, which is the Nipun Lakshya app. The mentors have the same tool, and then all the third-party assessors who come to the school also use the same tool with a different set of questions, of course, right? So the questions would change, but the method of assessment remains the same on the application. So for teachers, it's now a very, very reliable tool. They have the confidence that if they know a student is lagging in a particular competency, then they would be seen as lagging in their competency in the third-party assessment as well. But if they appear Nipun in a particular assessment in the school, then they would come out to be Nipun in any other assessment that would happen in that school on that application. The third thing is that this application, the data from this application has to be used by the teacher themselves and not for any kind of administrative tasks, right? So it's not a data collection tool for the state. The teachers do these assessments. The data resides in the local mobile phone application, and that is available to the teachers to take corrective action based on what they have observed. As soon as the data starts flowing to the government, and the government starts using it for reviews, we start seeing a lot of data fudging happening, right? Then it is in the best interest of the teacher to show that all students in the classroom are Nipun, right? And then no real evaluation or no real assessment is happening, and that leads to the whole system failing, right? So for us, it has been a very conscious choice to ensure that this whole tool becomes almost like a Robin to their Batman, right? It's a support tool for them, which only happens when these people trust what they're doing in the application, and they know that nobody's reviewing them based on the usage, but it is only a support to them. So yeah, I think that's it.
No, thanks so much for that, Ankit. And I think we might come back to that theme a little bit as we talk about people's experience as well. But just a quick follow-up there maybe for you. How do you ensure that, while the middle management in a government school system needs to also play a role of sort of supervising what's happening in the classroom and how effectively learning is being delivered? So how effective were you at sort of drawing that boundary for middle managers to know that there's data, but they're not supposed to touch it for sort of punitive reviews and so on, but instead just leave it for the teachers to use it?
For the middle management, we could have set targets to ensure that all students get Nipun. But the target setting was done at the level to ensure that all teachers should be assessing all students in the classroom at least once a month, right? So that is the only thing that they get to track. That are all the students being assessed. That is how they know that the app is being used and the teachers are actually assessing students and taking corrective action. But how many students came out to be Nipun, what is the action that was taken in the classroom is all that is left to the teachers for them to do. So that way, basically the middle managers, they are involved in ensuring that the application is being used and then in ensuring the technology is being used and assessments are happening. But the teachers know the results and they work on the results that they get.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Ankit. Urmila, if I could turn to you next. People's work has always emphasized high engagement approaches in the classroom. And you've always focused on doing that as a support to government systems rather than building a parallel system entirely of your own. Right? So based on your experience partnering with governments, what would you say are some of the essential elements that build foundational literacy and numeracy? And sort of for it to be successfully embedded in a large-scale government system, what does it actually take for that embedding to happen?
Good morning. I hope I'm audible. And first of all, many, many thanks to all of you for leaving your beds on a Sunday morning and being here for the cause of education. So People believes, my organization is called People, we believe that it's really important to not create a parallel system, but to work alongside with government in collaboration with government. Because as a non-profit organization, in any case, we don't have the reach or the breadth or the capacity to reach every corner of the country or even every corner of a state. And so we base our work on two pillars. One is to, build the capacity of the middle layer, who typically only focus on administrative tasks. But what we are trying to do is to make them accountable for academic improvement. So these are the mentor teachers, the master trainers, who take on the role of the instructional leaders in the system. The second thing is governance. Again, just like you said, Ankit, that, it's really important to assess the children, but for the assessment to not feel very high stakes. How do we get actual feedback from the ground of actual learning happening, and how do we act upon it? So what we've introduced is something that we call spot checks, where, the middle layer goes into the classrooms and just does random assessments, very quick ones, of a few children in the classroom to get a sense of what's happening in the classroom. And you spoke, didn't you, of, the feedback cycle being constant and supportive. So that's where we also come in to shift the system's mindset towards this support and governance being not supervisory, not punitive, but supportive. So our whole task is to train the middle layer of government in how to give feedback in a supportive way so that they are supporting the teacher's work in the classroom and not being an obstacle. So these are the two basic pillars on which we base our work, Bharath, and that enables us actually to unlock a lot of government spending. Government has budgets, but it may not always be utilized the right way. So, as a social sector organization, we spend a lot less, but our work enables the government itself to be the doer and the payer and the ultimate owners of the reform. And in so doing, we ensure that, public schools and public spending is done the right way.
No, that's great. Thanks so much, Urmila. I think this idea of supportive supervision, I think, has been a common theme across what all three of you have spoken about. But also curious about how you think, in your partnership with government, about sort of also holding the system accountable to an extent. Is that something you think about? Is that part of your role? Is that something you entirely leave to the government? Because we do know that there could be times where the system is not doing what it needs to be doing. So while, of course, you want to be supportive, I just wonder how you think about the flip side of it with also holding people accountable.
Very good question. So, the Nippon mission in our country has made FLN a strategic priority. The entire country is working towards it. But we all know that moving from policy to actual ground level implementation is the hardest part. And that's where we come in, because, what we need to see is implementation of consistent classroom practices. So we use a few levers that make that happen. We work consistently with the top layer of government as well as the middle layer of government, to make sure that the system itself becomes accountable over time for what's happening in the classroom, that the whole thinking shifts more towards the classroom and children's learning outcomes rather than administrative tasks. So that's how we are trying to make the system accountable for learning, not just for, of course, infrastructure, having the teachers in the classrooms. All of those are very important factors for improvement, and we can't do without them. But also, that can't be it. The focus also needs to be on, is the child learning? We are doing so much, but is it leading to outcomes? So we include the government in what we call data discussions. And so we look at the data holistically at different layers of government, not just the top layer of government, where decisions are made, but also at the zonal level, where actual implementation takes place, and even at the school level, with the principal and the teachers, so that, data is used for accountability, but data is not seen as a threat. So that has been, in fact, the biggest challenge for us, to help people see that data can be your friend and not a threat.
That's great. Thank you so much, Urmila, because I think in the process of those discussions, I'd imagine that there's also a shift in the focus to the role of those mid and senior management tiers themselves. So it's not just about sort of putting pressure on the teacher for the fact that teaching is not happening, but also about examining and introspecting about their own roles as bureaucrats. So yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for that. Tony, if I could turn to you next. We've been talking a little bit about sort of practices in the classroom, the role of teachers and so on. But there is, of course, a broader ecosystem in the school, right? And I think it really comes home in a wonderful school building like this one. But in any school, there is a broader ecosystem beyond the classroom itself. There are probably a whole set of well-being practices that are being followed within the school. There's a broader set of relationships outside of the immediate classroom. So just curious for your reflections on what role that plays in the way that a child receives the learning that is being delivered by the teacher.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for that question. I think the key word in the question is around learning. And it's been great to be able to hear colleagues on the couches here talking about learning rather than about teaching. And for us to understand, what does learning look like? And knowing that learning happens when the conditions are optimal. When the conditions are right and children feel comfortable, that they feel safe in their environment, that they feel secure, and they feel connected to the place where they are and connected within the classroom, then, and probably only then, will learning actually happen. So I think one of the other things is that we have to be sure that learning is not a mystery tour, that learning is not something that is done to children, but that we do together. And having those shared expectations at whatever level we are talking about within the school, I think is really major. I think one of the bigger things, though, is that leaders in schools need to be leaders of learning, more than leaders of people. I'm in a really lucky position at the moment where, as you have seen, Manita, who is our head of early years, and as a leader in early years and with me in the junior school, we work very closely together. And probably we have too many conversations about what learning looks like and what that continuum from the little ones through into primary might look like. We're always talking about what is developmentally appropriate for children and ensuring that the steps are there before and that we know what has come before so that we can build on that to then move forward. I think a lot of our conversations at our level are around what are the enduring understandings that children need to have, and is it right to have it at that level, or should it come a little bit later? Then I think it's our job to ensure that there are systems and structures in place to empower our teachers to be able to work with the children. And there's a lot of talk around learning. And so a lot of our professional learning happens when we're having conversations, and conversations about how we can empower our teachers, but how we can also spot when learning is happening, because that's actually quite difficult to do. And we need to have those skills to be able to look at what does learning look like and how do we actually know that it's happening. So we do a lot of talking about learning, but also we have regular daily check-ins with the kids around their well-being to ensure that that is, a priority for us. And I think the other thing is that we are always intentional about what we're doing. Nothing just happens by chance. And that doesn't mean that there can't be spontaneity, but we are looking at intentional learning and what does that look like. I think the other side of this is also how we talk with children and how we talk to them about learning. And the fact that restorative language is much more important than punitive language. And we're doing a lot of work in our schools at the moment around that. So in order to be able to set the scene for early literacy and early numeracy, all this has to happen first, because without it, it won't happen. Well, it may happen, but it won't happen in the way that we would like it to.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Tony. And if I could quickly follow up on that as well, just to, you spoke about leaders of learning, not just leaders of people. And I think that's a great sort of mindset for people in leadership positions to adopt. But in your experience, as people move from being educators to being in those leadership positions, how easy is that transition to make in the sense of sort of continuing to be responsible for the child's learning journey and not just seeing themselves as administrators or leaders of people? Is that a big shift? Do you feel like you have to work on it, or does that come naturally to someone who's always been an educator?
Yeah, that's a tricky question, isn't it? I think probably for a number of people it comes very naturally. And for others who are not necessarily embedded in wanting to look at children's learning, that becomes a little bit more difficult. I think, though, that leaders have to be committed to what learning looks like in their schools. And I think one of the ways that we can do that as we move into leadership positions is make sure that we are keeping up to date with what's going on, rather than letting the mundane, is the schedule looking okay, is the duty covered, is this happening, is that happening, is everything else happening? It's so important for us to be able to have most of our time looking at what that learning is. Having a mentor outside of the organisation is also important to keep you on that track, I think.
That's great. Thanks so much. And I think that those are lessons that really resonate in the context of sort of larger government school reforms, right? The idea of middle layers seeing themselves not just as administrators, but as educators, really, and being responsible for the learning of the child. So that's really helpful. But you also started by speaking about just the experience of the child. And Beatrice, I'd be curious if you can sort of build on that and talk about what the experience of the child almost needs to be as he or she sort of plays, learns, interacts with other children and experiences the classroom. What sorts of experiences for the child are optimal to ensure that learning and the fun of learning sort of continues in the classroom?
So I see learning as joyful all the time. We're trying to make learning joyful and fun. Children love to learn. They enjoy learning. It's their natural need. They want to know more. They want to explore. They are curious. So it's a natural process. And I hope that every teacher and educator that walks into a room or into a learning space feels that same joy, so that it's transdisciplinary and it goes to the children as well, to the families. On the other hand, learning happens all the time. It's part of the growth, and I really hope that it happens for us still too. But when it happens, especially from a child's perspective, it's when it's meaningful, differentiated, so it's based on every single child individually, and it's connected to the real world, to their real meanings. So we're talking about play, and I was joking this morning in the car with my colleague, and I was like, every time I hear the word play, it gives me shivers, because that is the adult perspective. We are saying children are playing, we need to make learning playful, but for a child, it's their normal day-to-day. That is, again, it's their nature. So instead of talking about learning through play, let's talk about engagement. Let's make, yes, through play, through discovery, but engaging. Not that just the child is there and he's playing with building blocks and we're like, they're learning, but what is it purposeful? What is the scope behind that? What is actually, can I identify what is the learning process that child is going through? Can the child identify it? Do they know? Are they aware of that process? Make them aware of that process is very, very important. And of course, exploration, follow their lead, have children build spaces that learning, that they can move around and they can choose how to approach that learning. And that is what we are going to talk about in my session later in my workshop, agency and voice. Give children the agency. In a classroom, there should always be more voice of a child than the voice of the teacher or the educator. And the teacher's role really is just to scaffold that learning process, to be able to identify by listening to children's conversations, expanding their vocabulary, provoking their thinking, stretching their thinking, and then design again the space, redesign the space with the children as well. And that will build a transdisciplinary learning. So a child is not doing math, it's not doing learning to read or to write. What they're making sense of the world. And it's important that that process becomes a tool for them so that they unconsciously use it in their natural day-to-day, through play, through conversations, through, just being at home and having dinner with their family.
No, that's really helpful. Thanks for that, Beatrice. I just wondered maybe if I could follow up on this aspect of sort of the child's own agency in that process, right? I wonder to what extent it is normal for a teacher to almost think of their role as being about delivering content or delivering materials versus actually thinking about the child's agency and the way that the child is receiving it. And I know in the Indian school system context, Urmila, we were just talking exactly about that shift, right, that needs to happen. So any thoughts on sort of enabling that shift to happen?
So I think when a teacher changes the mindset and starts looking at the child as the agent, for a while, it looks like a chaotic environment, and the teacher is extremely uncomfortable in that environment because it's uncontrollable, and the control is on the kids. And for the leadership, it can look like, oh my gosh, what's going on in here? What are the kids doing? It's Wild West. But then the teacher, through that process, learns to follow the children lead and to guide those children to have more agency. So the chaos becomes more natural. I'm going to give an example. Last week I was teaching to my reception kids. We're learning the parts of a story. So I know what the goal is. I know what the learning intention is. They know what the learning intention is. We have to learn the parts of the story. So what have we done? I started asking them for vocabulary. And so I started writing it down and drawing pictures. And with that vocabulary, then I said, okay, now let's build a story. And that story was built by the students. It was collaborative. I didn't put any input, any work. I was just recording everything that they were saying. Then they drew the pictures. We obviously looked at that vocabulary, how to represent it, what it might mean in other languages, and it was just depending on the conversations that the kids were bringing on. So I was following their lead. And then the next step is to actually put those pictures together. Kids are gonna try and write some of the words and create our own book, our own story. But everything is done by the kids. I am only the one following their thinking and reporting it on a paper perhaps or on a book and putting those pieces together.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think that's a great example. Ankit, if I could turn it back to you, as we think about the context again of sort of reforming a large-scale governance system. I suppose we could look at many of the principles that have been talked about in the discussion so far and design a great pilot program with a government system to sort of implement some of those principles. But I think, as we all know, sort of taking it from there to a large scale across a state, across a whole country, even across a district, right, is really challenging. And so curious about your reflections on what it takes to actually enable that scale. Probably administrative capacity, the ability to sort of monitor what is actually happening at scale. But yeah, just curious for your reflections on all of those pieces.
No, that's an excellent question. I think the whole graveyard of education reforms is filled with all of these wonderful, successful pilots who could never scale to 100,000 classrooms. Yeah. I think the first thing that we need to understand is that we need to really trust teachers. That's what Beatrice also talked about, and I think that is where we start. We start with really trusting teachers and their capacity to deliver instruction, good instruction at scale. And once we start from there, then again there are three critical levers that ensure the scale, success at scale for any of these initiatives. The first thing is we provide the right kind of enablement, empowerment to our teachers, but also allow for a lot of agency for teachers. Right? In UP, what we have done is for all of the 450,000 teachers that we are working with, we have provided them with very high quality teaching learning material. They have very good quality books. There are workbooks for students to practice. There are a lot of print-rich material, a lot of charts that are there in the classroom. They have a lot of maths kits and other things to support their teaching, right? There is a teacher guide which also ties together all of this material and gives the teachers a day-to-day lesson plan that they can use to teach the students. However, this is not prescriptive. This is only prescriptive. We do not want to turn teachers into robots. Yeah? So the teachers are free to adapt all of this material to the needs of the classroom, to the needs of the local region. Yeah? And that's the kind of agency that they have. We're not monitoring how they're using all of these things. We're only empowering teachers with the right material that they now have present in the classroom. I think that is one very, very important thing. As soon as we start monitoring the use of these inputs, that is where the system crumbles. Then we're not focusing on the learning, we're just focusing on ensuring that all of these minor things are being used by the teachers. So we moved away from that completely in UP. That is one. The second thing is we also need to move away from this myth of one-time training of teachers translating into change in the classroom. Right? That does not really work. We train teachers once a year, and we expect them to take that training back to the classroom and replicate it as it is in the classroom. That does not really happen. What we're doing is, one, there's an annual cycle of training. The same thing gets repeated every year for the teachers in person for a week. These are, again, the things that we're talking about for students here. We're doing the same thing for teachers. We're making it a very interactive session where the teachers are participating. The teachers are giving feedback on how they could teach better in the classroom. And that leads to an annual revision of the whole teaching learning material itself. And the second part that Urmila was also talking about is a lot of hand-holding and very customized support to teachers through the mentors that we have. So there are mentors who now visit schools. Every school is visited every month by a mentor. The mentor actually sits in the classroom, observes how the teacher is teaching, assesses some randomly selected 5 students, the spot assessments that you were talking about, and based on that provides very customized feedback and nudges to all teachers in the school. So that's the kind of hand-holding and support that the teachers need, right? It's not the one-time training that really works. And the third thing is, we can provide all sets of inputs to teachers, but none of that would work if the teachers are not really motivated to implement all of that. And in government systems, you cannot create financial incentives like you can create in the private sector, right? So the teachers are used to teaching in a particular way for the last, let's say, 70 years, and now you want to change that. You need to create the right incentives for all of these teachers. In the state of UP, what we have done is we've created something called a mechanism called Nipun Vidyalaya, or a Nipun school. The idea is that every teacher now has a very clear goal that they need to make every student in their classroom Nipun. Once they know that all students are Nipun, then they nominate their school for an external assessment. And when this external assessment happens, and at least 80% students turn out to be Nipun, the school is called a Nipun school, and the teachers are called Nipun champions, and they're felicitated at a huge ceremony at the district level. Right? So that's the kind of incentive that has now been created, and that really shifted the whole focus from these micro inputs to ensuring that the students are learning. We started with some 4,000 Nipun schools in 22-23. Last year we had 48,000 Nipun schools. Yeah, and the result that we're seeing in these internal assessments is also reflecting in the ASAR assessments and the NAS assessments. Yeah, so what we've essentially done is to ensure that instructional design reaches scale successfully. We've made the cognitive load very low for teachers, and we've ensured that they're incentivized to move in the right direction. So teaching is now easy, and it is rewarding, and that is what has led to the scale-up of the whole initiative.
No, that's amazing to see, and I think it deserved the round of applause that it got there. And just curious also, just building on that point about the achievements in the state, Ankit, because I think there were a lot of sort of positive data coming out of the latest ASAR survey as well. So just curious if you could talk about that. I mean, I think the 48,000 Nipun schools that you mentioned is amazing. But I think we are seeing this emerge in the data through ASAR as well. So maybe just speak about that a bit.
Yeah, I think there was always a lot of question about all these internal assessments happening in the state of UP, where UP was claiming a lot of success. Till 2024, that was the case. Only last year, the two major assessments that happen at a national scale, ASAR assessment that is conducted by Pratham, and then the National Achievement Survey that is conducted by NCRT, which is again a government body. Both of these assessments, the results came out. In ASAR, in 2018, UP was the second worst performing state in the country in terms of FLN outcomes. In 2018, roughly 11% students in grade 3 could read grade 2 text, right? And that number has now shifted to roughly 32%. It is not an achievement. It is still a pretty bad number. We would want to be 100%. But in terms of the delta that we are seeing from 2018 to 2024, UP is the most improved state in the country. And from being the second worst state in the country, it has now moved to the 9th rank as per ASAR reports. In the NAS reports, the National Achievement Survey, again, UP is the second most improved state there, and we were ranked around 19th in the country, and we are now ranked 4th in the country, right? And all of this change, I think I'll also pass on all the applause to the teachers in the state of UP, who have done really wonderful work over the last 4 to 5 years, where we've seen all of these outcomes really shifting, only with one thing, which is the right motivation. To give you an example, in 2022, October 2022, when I first went to the field, I interacted with a lot of teachers. All the interactions were centered around just these complaints. Sir, your app doesn't work. The books did not reach us on time. The trainings did not happen, or the trainings happened, but the instructors were not, willing to train us properly. They did not answer our questions, and all of these complaints were happening. Now, if you go to any school in UP, and Vanita and I, we recently went to some schools in UP. The teachers are burdened with a lot of other stuff, right? There is an intensive revision of the electoral roll that is happening in the state. Teachers are busy there, but they still make time to come to school, right? There were complaints about students not turning up to school, but now the teachers have taken the initiative to actually go to the parents and convince them to send their kids to school. The only reason all of this is happening is because they want to know when the external assessment is going to happen, because they want to get this whole Nipun school certification, and they want to get the Nipun champion certification at the end of the year, right? The biggest change was for teachers who had initially claimed that this will never happen because this has not happened in the last 30 years. But when they saw some younger teachers getting these rewards, they were like, this new kid, right? If he can get this reward, then I obviously am a better teacher. I can definitely do this. Right? So that's the biggest change that at least we've seen in the state.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much for that, Ankit. And yeah, we often sort of focus on the big problem and the gloomy statistics and so on, but it's so great to hear stories of real transformation like this happening at scale. As you say, it's not job done, but it's a great start at this point, and in the right direction for sure. Urmila, curious for your reflections on a similar point, actually, because you've made this journey from sort of running exemplar schools within the government system where you're able to focus a lot of deep effort on a handful of schools, to then saying, how can you take the lessons from that and start to apply them at large scale across an entire school system, whether in a smallish state like Delhi or a really large one like Madhya Pradesh. And that must require building the capacity of teachers at scale, building the ability to conduct assessments, as Ankit was talking about, also at scale. So yeah, just curious for your reflections on that journey from sort of building deep practices in a few schools to building at scale, and what lessons you think other states can also take away as they look at the journey that people has been on.
Thank you, Bharat. Before I answer your question, I must say that, we all know what needs to be done, and we're all trying to solve the same huge problem, move the same big boulder. Why don't social sector organizations collaborate more? Let's, when we walk off this stage, make sure that we talk and collaborate in future. People started by creating these schools that were in public-private partnership, and there we focus on the whole school model, and we focus on every child. Really, I mean, if you strip everything away and you remember that these are no-fees schools and very low-resourced compared to a lot of private schools, when you go into the heart of the school and you sit in the classroom, you'll really see that it's not much different when it comes to the focus on the child and the teaching and learning and the student engagement that's at the heart of the school. But when you want to take that to scale, it's much harder. You then have to narrowly focus on a few things. And of course, learning outcomes is the holy grail. And you can't think of changing everything. So you start with teacher mindsets. That's the key thing. In India, every parent and every teacher is so focused on marks and rote teaching and learning that it's just probably a century of how we've thought and behaved. And it's really hard to change. And I would wager that, most of us, if not all, maybe not all, most of us sitting in this auditorium today are products of that same system that we are trying to change. Agree? Yeah? That's why it's so hard. So what we've done is we've focused on 3 key things because, learning happens when conditions are right, as both of you spoke about, and teacher preparation, climate for learning, active teaching learning practices that the teacher is equipped with are all very important. So what we work on in our Lifted initiative are 3 basic things. One is formative assessment. So we all know that the large-scale data gathering is very high stakes, can be fudged, feels very threatening. While that's needed, you cannot do away with it. So that's part of our governance, right? So you can't do away with it. But at the same time, like Dheer, I don't know how many of you heard Dheer speak yesterday. He spoke about how this data actually never reaches the teacher and how the teacher actually can never make use of this data, even though he or she has to participate in this data gathering. It feels like a useless exercise to the teacher. So we thought about how can data work for the teacher, and obviously it's, in the moment, in the classroom, continuous formative assessment. So along with that, what we've done is we've worked on some high-impact teaching strategies that not only help the teacher to do a constant temperature check in the classroom as to where are my learners so that I can meet my learners where they are, and also to create an engaging, joyful learning environment, because without that, learning is very difficult. And the third important thing is just teaching learning material that's focused and targeted on those pesky, lagging competencies. You know, the assessments tell us that there are competencies that the children are lagging behind on. Nipun mission has succeeded somewhat, but we are not quite there yet. There are critical things that children are still not learning. So then how do we zoom in and focus on those lagging competencies and make sure that what's taking place in the classroom targets them very clearly? So these are the three things that I would say we've kind of extracted from our exemplar school experience.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that, Urmila. And just curious, similar to the points Ankit made about sort of the transformation that's happening at the school system level or the state system level, if there are sort of similar signs of progress you're seeing in Madhya Pradesh, since you work across a large state there, anything that you'd like to leave the group with, again, on that thing of saying, well, it's not just all problems, there is real progress that's being made.
Yes, so one of the most beautiful things that we've seen happen in Madhya Pradesh is just what we call Shekshik Samvad. It's communities of practice. We have to trust the teacher. We have to also allow the teachers to learn from each other. Because the best teacher is your colleague, because your colleagues are struggling with the same problems. They may have the answer that you're struggling with, and vice versa. So across the whole state of Madhya Pradesh, in 52 districts, we have seen communities of practice really take off. And these gatherings address real issues that come from the classroom, addressed by the teachers themselves. The agenda is led by the teachers, and it's really empowering for the teacher and wonderful for us to see. And, in other, the other things that we've also seen are just this shift into the classroom. Because as we know, traditionally, the government principal doesn't go inside a classroom. The government principal sees themselves as an administrator. But both in Madhya Pradesh and in Delhi, we've been able to make a shift. And we are seeing that in terms of data, where it's very positive that school leaders are actually going into the classrooms, observing their teachers teaching, and they are being able to give their teachers some constructive feedback. It was a very difficult journey because in our Indian context and how we are with each other, it was very difficult for the principal to give constructive feedback to the teacher because they felt that they couldn't really say it. So feedback initially would just be, "Bahut acha, you're doing really well." But then constant, coaching and constant, hand-holding and support has made them see that what the teacher is really looking for is something that will help her or him to get better, because the classroom is really the most challenging space.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Urmila.
I fully agree with what you just said. And I actually want to add that when a leader starts in a new position or takes over a role, I always recommend strongly and heartily, forget everything that is office work, forget the fires in the morning, cover system. Spend your first month at least in the classroom, get to know your children, get to know your teachers, and that's where you're going to understand the culture of the school. And that's when then you can start having conversations. You can go and look at the curriculum and say, okay, so this is what we need to tweak. Here is where there is inconsistency. These are my next team meetings with my team. But it's then when you know what is really happening in the school. And that has to come from teachers, from governments, from anyone that is leading education.
Absolutely, and we have to remember that real learning outcomes will take time. But what we have to first change is mindsets and get everybody interested in what's happening in the classroom. That's the most important space.
No, that's wonderful. As Tony said, leaders of learning, right? Not just leaders of people or administrators. So Tony, if I could come back to you, we've talked a little bit about the teacher capacity, the motivation of teachers, and so on. So just curious, in a school like this, what practices you follow to actually develop the capacity of teachers to ensure that they are delivering playful, sort of developmentally appropriate instructions to children, to help children learn at the end of the day. So what practices you're following, and what practices maybe larger state systems and so on could be able to adopt based on what you found effective here?
I think when it comes to high quality foundational literacy and numeracy, we need to have high quality educators as well. And note that I'm not saying teachers, because I think we have to be in schools looking at learning first rather than looking at teaching. In our school, we have a lot of emphasis on professional learning. And in some schools, it's called professional development. We don't like to call it development. We want to talk about it as being conversations that lead to high quality best practice in what learning looks like in the class. I think there is a notion that when we have professional learning conversations, that they are best done if we go off to a course somewhere. And that is not something that we espouse at all. We will either bring in people to talk with our team so that it's more tailor-made to what we are looking for, or we will look at what best practice looks like within our own school. Because as you quite rightly said, that some of the best learning that happens is when you are looking at what your colleagues are doing and when they are presenting to you. And I think you only need to look at yesterday afternoon to know that. When I was wandering around those groups yesterday afternoon, it was incredible to see the engagement that you had in what your colleagues were presenting to you. And I'm very mindful that that engagement looks exactly like it would for a child in the classroom. That when they don't get anything from the people who may be up here, that's when you bring out your phone. They don't, hopefully. But you bring out your phone and start doing something else, and we've lost you. One of the things that we talk a lot about in professional learning conversations is around how to get kids involved in learning, and what does that look like. I really do believe in making sure that we've got the right people in the right place, and then giving them the tools to be able to do the job that we want them to be able to do. And I keep coming back, and I know I'm harping on about this, but for us it's really about what does learning look like at every stage as we're going through the continuum. I think one of the things that is also important is to be able to help teachers to understand what the chatter about learning is all about. What is that chatter around the culture? What do you hear when you're in the classroom without judging the child, but what do you hear them talking about when they're talking about numeracy? What do you hear when they're talking about literacy? And how is that going to help to inform you as an educator to be able to use that data that you are getting to make decisions about what you're going to do next in the classroom? Having now been in India for 10 years in Mumbai, one of the things I can say is that I'm seeing that teacher quality is getting higher and higher. And I think that is in a lot of respects due to the emphasis that perhaps the educational authorities are now putting into what best practice actually does look like. And I see much more talk about what is best practice in schools happening. I see teachers who are much better able to be able to come into a classroom. But I think we still have to really strengthen our homegrown teachers. We need to do a lot more around educating parents about what does learning look like. And it doesn't look like what it was when you were at school. That learning has moved, like everything else in the world has moved, and we need to be looking at helping parents to understand that the reasons behind perhaps why we're doing what we do. And I think we need to continue to lobby for pre-service courses that are going to help give educators the tools so that when they come into the classroom that they are in a much better mindset about what learning is going to look like.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Tony. And it's really sort of hopeful to hear the fact that, many of the practices that you've talked about are things that Urmila has also spoken about in terms of sort of engaging teachers and helping them learn from each other. So that idea of sort of helping teachers learn in the same way that we are hoping to have children learn through a facilitative process and an engaging classroom. I just have an eye on time, and I know that it's been an incredibly rich discussion, but I think we are up on time, and we probably need to close here. But I just want to, some of the themes that have stood out for me in such a rich and productive discussion, things like sort of motivating teachers, working on the mindset of the teachers, trusting teachers, supervising them but in a supportive manner. I think all of these are things that have sort of resonated across each of the comments that the four of you have made. And it feels really hopeful that we are seeing such signs of progress, but also that these are things that we think we can build both in sort of individual schools, but also at a large scale across large government school systems. So that's all incredibly hopeful. So with that, I'll bring this to a close just by saying thank you to this wonderful panel. I think it's been a wonderful discussion. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you all so much for the time.